Welcome to the World Building Seminar. A quick bit of housekeeping. If you've got mobile phones, can you put them on silent or turn them off, please, just so they're not interrupting. Should you need the lavatoire, it is a hard right just out of this door. In the event of a fire, there is not a fire drill planned. Use that door as quickly as you can in an orderly fashion. Just follow me. I'll just pop it down there. Cheers, Phil. And we are going to be recording the whole session, so we are going to have a Q&A section. If you don't want to be on the recording, just wait till the end when we stop recording, and then you can ask your question. But all this is going to be recorded. And with no further ado, you ready to start? Good. So my name's Tom. I'm from the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast. I have the esteemed privilege of interviewing these chaps on your behalf, and chapette. Basically, we've got a couple of questions that have been submitted that we're going to open up with. Am I on? And then you guys can ask your own questions as well. So first things first, let's find out who we're talking to. So starting at this end, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
So I'm Matthew Dawkins. I am a developer of games for Onyx Path Publishing and a writer for companies such as White Wolf, Modiphius, Green Ronin, Chaosium, among others. I worked on Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition and Call of Cthulhu and various other games quite extensively.
Yeah, well, my name is Klara, and I am a freelance RPG writer. I work for Modiphius, I work for Onyx Path Publishing, I've worked for Horskjær, and I've worked for Maple Leaf Games. So I've written quite a few things, Vampire, Call of Cthulhu, all kinds of exciting things, yeah.
I'm Benn Graybeaton. I'm current line manager for Infinity over at Modiphius. I've also been involved in Conan, Mutant Chronicles, pretty much anything with 2D20 stamped on the side.
I'm Bill Heron. I'm a writer, proofreader, indexer, what else? On most of Modiphius products now. Currently working on Infinity and Acton Cthulhu. Worked on nearly all the Mutant Chronicles line and some bits of Star Trek, but nothing that really nothing note. A couple other minor freelance products, and that's me, freelance as well. So,
Kevin Young, founder of Inspiring Games. We have a game called Legends Untold with quite an extensive world in it called Mornadar, which we spend quite a lot of time on, and has various homages to Scotland and other cultures within it, I would say.
Excellent, thank you very much. So the first question we had submitted, this is quite a big open one, so go mad. So what was the biggest inspiration or the most memorable inspiration for a setting that you have worked on? So what was your biggest or most memorable inspiration for a setting you've worked on? It's an open one.
Okay. I suppose with games like Vampire the Masquerade, various World of Darkness games, my biggest inspiration it comes from literature, mostly the works of the author J.G. Ballard, who is an excellent author of dystopia, sci-fi novels you may have heard of, like High Rise, Crash, Concrete Island. He has an excellent way of making the world around the characters completely alien, and it steadily makes the protagonists incredibly alien as well. They're very hard to relate to, and so I kind of transfer that into my work on World of Darkness games, because your characters become increasingly farther removed from being human or moral as the game goes on, and as you explore the universe of games like Vampire the Masquerade, you find things further and further away from humanity. So that's probably my biggest influence.
Excellent. Anyone else?
In a past life, I was an academic, and a lot of my influence actually comes from my studies of the politics of the 1980s.
Okay.
So no matter what you think you've read, it was worse. And the simple fact that things can get so out of hand so quickly always makes me want to bring that element to games.
Is that like UK politics or further afield?
Well, I was born in UK, but I lived in New Zealand most of my life.
Okay.
So most of it is Antipodean.
Excellent. Anyone else?
I wasn't an academic, to be clear, but for me, certainly the studies from my first degree, which is in ancient history, has a massive impact on the world that we're building. So the studies of the campaigns of Alexander the Great, or what was happening in Macedonia, Persia, Egypt, even Iron Age Britain, all the time these things come through. And even today, looking at archaeology in Scarabray and recent finds in Wales has a massive impact on the game that we're making.
So a lot of the inspiration comes from real world subject matter then, definitely. Cool.
Yeah, I'll add to that because I'm a nurse too. I'm an intensive care nurse, and if you go a little away from academics, we can also take a lot of inspiration from the hands-on things we do in life. And I especially took a lot of inspiration from my nursing when I write horror, because it is working at a hospital, an intensive care unit is horrible sometimes from a social perspective, from a body horror perspective. So that's something that really taught me how to depict that in what I write. So that's something you can do with almost every type of job, I believe. It is really just soaking everything up. And I will say especially human experiences, experiencing real fear, real loss, real anger is something I've really taken from my nursing job and applied to my writing. Yeah.
Anything else? Are we happy with that? Cool. So the next one we've got is, how do you keep track when you're developing a setting? So what kind of resources do you use to sort of track? Is it online? Is it digital? Is it paper? What's your kind of process for that?
I think for me it's probably Scrivener at the moment. One of the things I found is, as Kev can tell you, is things like wikis, your own personal wiki. Scrivener's great for assembling notes and bits and pieces. I mean, I have several notebooks of ideas. I've also got several notebooks now of research of things I've been doing for Acta Cthulhu and binders full of original ideas. But I think the easiest way, without going down the whole yarn and post-it notes everywhere, that's probably the easiest way to do it. That's probably the easiest way to describe Scrivener. It's a way of keeping all your bits and pieces together as a bit of software.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult learning curve, which I'm still learning. So, but for me, that's the best way I find of keeping track of all these bits and pieces.
Yeah, I still go for the notes and the conspiracy map on the wall. But no, other than that, spreadsheets, Google Sheets, I mean, it's very boring, but it's a very effective way of creating a simple database of characters, locations, events that have happened. Certainly, Scrivener's wikis are brilliant if you have the time to set them up or the resources to set them up. But otherwise, yeah, I think a decent spreadsheet is a good way of navigating a world that you're building.
I think there is sort of that cliche image in there of the wall just covered with the string connecting it and everything. I think that's what this person's going for with the question.
I have an interesting one on that we're definitely in the spreadsheet territory, as Bill will know, poor guy, and using Dropbox to share between myself and the other half of Inspiring Games, Hugh. But what we have done to save a bit of sanity is apply a new product. We're just going through it just now, actually, which anybody can buy off the shelf. I think you can actually get it free with a limited license called World Anvil, and that is a very good way of taking what you've got from all those spreadsheets and so forth and turning it into something that you and indeed other people around the world can access easily in a nice graphical format. So that product is called World Anvil. We found it by accident, and it is really helping us get on top of things.
Awesome.
I tend to use a 6 spreadsheet rule,
Okay.
which is if I need more than 6 tabs on a spreadsheet, then it's time to actually just write it down and have it written in one place. It's just gotten too complicated for me at that point. I have post-it notes, I have notepads, I have it typed up in different ways, and often they're the same thing that's written in different formats. But yeah, if you need to get really in depth with something, you should probably have published that by now.
Awesome. Okay, the next one we've got is, how important is the visual and the artistic component to your world building process?
So with a lot of the, in fact, well, from I guess the reverse perspective, it's one of the most rewarding things as a writer to see how an artist turns your words into art. So yeah, you might write 20,000 words of a chapter, and hopefully a chapter won't be longer than that. And then you turn it over to editing and layout and art, and then you see what they come up with based on either your very specific art directions or just your text alone. And that's incredibly inspiring for subsequent projects. That's what I found, I guess, going through the journey of being a freelance writer. It's when you realize how your words can shape art, the art then goes on to shape your words, because you get to see how people are picturing the things you're writing down.
It's kind of circular almost.
Exactly, yeah. And that really depends on the artist. Some people need incredibly exacting notes. Some people want creative freedom. There's risks on both sides, because you can seem like you're being too controlling as a writer or developer, or you can be I guess opening it up to disaster, because artists can be creatively explosive, if you like.
It's very diplomatic.
But yeah, art is an incredible inspiration, visual art.
Yeah, and if you look at it from an immersive perspective, just being able to paint a picture with your writing is so important in world building, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to put the writer or the reader or the player in this world. So use all of your senses when you write and build a world. How does it physically feel to be in here? How does it smell? How does it sound? Because that's the only way you can really immerse the player in what you're doing. It's how we sense the world around us. It's our senses. So really go into detail. You can't go in almost enough detail with your world. I'm a big Tolkien fan. He likes to describe every single branch and every single leaf on that branch, and I really like that. It really is something that can give your players a more immersive experience. So I would recommend that for anyone who builds a world.
I'm gonna be a bit of a heretic on this one.
Ooh, I hate art.
It's not that I hate art, it's that sometimes I can't see it.
Okay.
I have very strange colour distinction in my eyes, so certain shades just don't register at all. So a lot of the time I actually have to trust other people.
Okay.
So I say to other people on my team, does this look good or not?
Yeah.
And I just want to know if 3 people come back to me. If 2 of them say, yes, that looks good, and it will pass with the IP holder, then generally I'll just have to go with it.
Okay.
Because I don't know what you guys are seeing sometimes.
Do you think that diminishes sort of how much of an impact the art has on your influence then?
It doesn't really impact me a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't really look at it very much. I will look at it, and sometimes I'll enjoy it. But like I said, I'll be the heretic on this one.
I think with the Mutant Chronicles, for example, it's a symbiotic relationship. We're talking about a diesel punk universe. We're talking about giant shoulder pads. Everything's turned up to 11. Big guns and bad attitudes. Go to the Mutant Chronicles has got one of the iconic characters, Mitch Hunter, kicking a space Nazi zombie in the face, and that's pretty much defines the entire Mutant Chronicles universe to a certain extent, I think.
But it had to be limited to a 12+ rating.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
I think I would echo everything that the guys have said. The one thing on the particular game that we make is it is very much an art-consuming machines. A lot of other games are too, but basically the cards all have a piece of art in them, so that you have to order a lot of art. And most of the stuff comes through on the phone every couple of days. When you see it, it changes your world. I agree. Something can come in, you go, wow, I never even thought of that, which is pretty amazing. So the interesting point was on art direction. For me, it depends particularly what I'm trying to achieve on a given piece. So if I have a very specific part of the world that I want to describe and I need it in there, I will be quite tight with it. But I know that the artists love it when I go the other day and I go, fill your boots, just make it cool. And they come back with a question mark and go, yeah, seriously, what is it you want? I mean, no, seriously, fill your boots. And like the guy was just in heaven, and then he came back and he said, is that okay? And meanwhile, I'm picking my jaw off the floor because it was so nice,
And sometimes you have to let the artists have creative freedom, because not every single developer or writer is good at explaining art, and whether it is because they can't picture it in their mind or whether they can't see it as well as someone else might. For instance, if I'm asked to describe a map or even sketch out a map for artists to then elaborate for a published book, I'm awful, because I am just a crap map maker. I might be able to describe how someone's face looks, so if we need a portrait of a villain in a piece, I can do that, but doing a map of a dungeon or a mansion or something like that, I'm best off just finding genuine floor plans from something online saying, make it like that, because I have no mind for architecture, I guess.
Make it like that, but legally distinct.
Yeah, exactly. Name the building something else.
All right, awesome. So the next one we've got is for those of you that have worked on sort of pre-existing IPs. So Vampire being a good example, things like that. How do you feel about adding to those IPs? How do you feel about the content that you're adding to an existing IP? And how do you kind of deal with that emotionally is probably not the right word, but kind of, you know, it's quite a weight to deal with something that someone else has created and add on to it. How does that kind of work for yourselves?
Yeah, I definitely have. I've written Chicago by Night, which is a big supplement to V5, Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. And for those of you who know Vampire, you know there are different clans, and these clans represent different things. So I had the opportunity to write about Clan La Sombra, and a big major change in this clan. And I know there are lots and lots and lots of fans of Clan La Sombra specifically. So I felt intimidated. I was scared. Like, what if I fuck this up? What if I write something everyone is going to hate and is going to have my name on it? But I also think that fear or that respect for what I was writing really made the project that much better. And it gave me a sense of, okay, I really have to do a hell of a good job on this project, because there are so many people out there that's going to be super upset if I do a bad job. So it's intimidating. I would say it's scary, but it's also a great opportunity to actually do something you've always wanted to do with this big thing in the game, and to put your own fingerprint on it without stepping on too many toes along the way.
Yeah, so I've worked on Vampire pretty much since I got into writing RPGs, and I had been playing and running Vampire for many years. I've been making videos about Vampire, the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires and gaming on YouTube, and so I've been immersed in that world for over a decade, and probably longer than that. And so I've kind of had two seminal works from my perspective, which was Beckett's Jihad Diary, which was for the 20th anniversary edition of Vampire, which was like the big dump of lore, all the meta plot, everything I'd ever picked up through reading Vampire, playing it for years and years and years, went into this one book. And then there was V5, which is the new edition, and I'm working on the core book. And all of a sudden, I've got to come up with new ideas. Everything I was doing for 20th anniversary was essentially a celebration and an expansion of an existing IP. But V5, we had the direction from on high to make this the new edition of Vampire. It needs to feel like a revolution in Vampire the Masquerade. Okay. And again, there's a certain amount of intimidation. There's a lot of weight put on you at that point, because a game like Vampire has thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more fans around the world, and all of a sudden they're all going to be reading your work and judging it. So you have a lot of responsibility to deliver something that satisfies the existing fan base but can still draw in new fans. And that's a very fine line to walk, as anyone who's worked on a new edition of a game can ever say.
Anyone else?
Well, pretty much everything I've worked on has had an IP holder somewhere in the background. Some of them have been very light touch, and some are a lot less. So when I've been working on different IPs, it really comes down to how much freedom you have with that IP holder. When we were working on Mutant Chronicles, where we basically had no restrictions on what we could do, you just run for your life. We got to fill in all the gaps that were missing from the second edition. You know, entire continents of Earth had never been considered. You know, where did China go in second edition? It's just missing. So we got to fill in all these lovely little gaps that had been done, because when the game was written, it was just trying to get out what it could and tell the story it wanted to tell. But we were able to pick up new and interesting things and bring them forward. And so a lot of that was real fun. But then you had to deal with the fan base, who were a bit confused about why these things hadn't been spoken about before. And then, like you say, you're trying to bring people in as much as you're trying to appeal to the old fans.
It's a bit of a balancing act, I imagine, trying to please both parties.
And it's impossible. I mean, established fans, for better or worse, have what they like because they've been playing it for years. you're never going to appeal to every established fan because they have their own vision of the game, which goes back to that entire, what we were saying before.
And they've probably got a library of headcanon they are bringing to it as well.
Exactly. So some people will be disappointed, some people will be thrilled. You've just got to hope there'll be at least one thing in your book that appeals to them.
Awesome. That was good. Okay.
I'd like to add something because I'm incessant.
Go for
talking.
it. Save me asking another question.
But no, it's on the subject of dealing with IPs owned by other people. So, for instance, I've worked for Green Ronin. Green Ronin published the Song of Ice and Fire RPG. And on the other hand of IP restriction, as you can imagine with the vast popularity of the Game of Thrones TV show and the novel series, George R.R. Martin himself has an incredibly tight grip over what you can write in RPG sourcebooks related to that setting. He personally reads every single RPG sourcebook, makes annotations on everything written by these writers who feel terrified of what they write because they're going to write something, they'll send it off, he'll send it back and say no, but won't necessarily tell you what you need to write because he doesn't want to spoil any upcoming books. So you're constantly throwing ideas into the void, hoping one of them sticks. And this is why often when you've got IPs like A Song of Ice and Fire, it takes so long for books to come out because you are trying to balance the creative desires of the owner with your own and with fan expectations. So that's a whole other element that complicates world building.
But
when that's why he's not done the next book.
When you see a yes from that guy, you know you've nailed it.
Yeah.
Excellent. So this is a bit of a wild card question, and it's the last one I'm going to ask before we move over to the audience. So if you could expand on any existing setting or world that you haven't expanded on, which would it be, and what would you like to add to it? So if you had your choice of any setting to work on and add to.
For me, probably Babylon 5.
Okay. Cool.
I think that's my holy grail. I'd love to be able to work on a Babylon, decent non-D20 Babylon 5 RPG.
Nice. I like it.
That's a tough question. A fan-made game, to be clear. We do not own the IP for this.
No, it's not. There's no IP. You've just...
No, but we made it, which gives you an idea of how much we love it. I'd love to do a game based in the Tron universe, which we made, but we do not have the IP for it. Okay. I'll say it again. We do not have the IP for it.
On the record.
If I had my druthers, Dr. McNinja.
Well, referring back to me saying I'm a Tolkien fan, well, Middle Earth would probably be something I would love to work on and expand.
Awesome.
Probably the Planescape setting for Dungeons and Dragons. I am sure at some point we'll see it in 5th edition, or we'll be waiting until 6th edition. It's bewildering to me why it's never been brought back, but I think Planescape is one of the most inspiring, innovative settings for the most popular fantasy RPG going, and it's just amazingly expansive. So being able to work on that, being able to tailor the planes and the City of Doors, all of that would be wonderful.
I do love the Planescape myself. That's a good call. All right, we're going to open up to you guys. So if you've got a question, stick your hand in the air and I'll shout out. Hopefully we've got more than one. Start with yourself then.
Well, first I would say big fan of Song of Fans, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you do that.
Awesome.
I hope you like them in the Camarilla.
Well, I was just going to ask about at what point does geography come into it? Do you have, if you're doing a setting thing, so you have the geography sort of vaguely sorted out first, and you think, I want it to fit into that, or you have an idea for like a culture or a race or whatever that thing, and it's like that sort of implies a certain geography that goes with it. I know that the sort of fantasy setting, one planet, so lots of different geography all put together. Sci-fi ones, each planet's its own little unique sort of geography thing. But just at what stage do you think you consider geography?
So if you're talking about creating an entirely new world, like something that doesn't exist, I think that's a good question, because I don't think, from my perspective, I don't necessarily think geography in as the first thing. I often have an idea for culture or a certain type of person even, and I build from that and I expand from that. But that again is because I have a lot of person experience. Like I have a lot of experience with humans. So if you have a lot of experience with or find geography interesting, I can imagine that your starting point would probably be a mountain or a lake or a city or and a certain type of infrastructure. It really depends on what you find interesting in building a world and what experience you have as a person.
Yeah, Ed Greenwood, very well known for designing the Forgotten Realms, he started the Forgotten Realms with the Dale Lands, so Shadow Dale. Everyone who knows Forgotten Realms knows Shadow Dale, and the Dale Lands is just a very merry old England region of the Forgotten Realms. And the reason he started there was because it was very easy to write about a rural, almost Tolkien-esque culture, where occasionally you'd have the Zentarim coming in, stealing mines and doing all this other stuff. And because he was running it for his home group, occasionally they wanted to leave the Dale Lands, so that's what compelled him to start writing areas outside of the Dale Lands, and so he was able to come up with lots of different foreign cultures. Now, that's what I'm trying to do with World of Darkness for 5th edition now. Because what happened near the end of the 3rd edition, as it's now called, the revised edition, was pretty much every city was a carbon copy of each other. If it was a Camarilla city, it had a prince, it had Primogen, a sheriff, and the rest. And a Sabbat city had an archbishop, and the Catholic version. Now, with 5th edition, we have that archetypal city with Chicago by night. We have a prince with some Primogen, a sheriff, some harpies. But then you've got Milwaukee, which is introduced in an upcoming book called Let the Streets Run Red, which has a prince, but it also has a council of 3 judges. And there's no sheriff. There's also a pack that roves around responsible for grabbing up anyone who breaks the law. Then you've got Indianapolis, which is led by the Ministry, the rebrand of the followers of Set. And that is almost like an evangelical commune of a vampire city. So the idea is to make the World of Darkness a more diverse place politically and philosophically, because why wouldn't it be if you've had vampires that exist for thousands of years? They're going to imprint their own signature on a location.
I think geography is an interesting choice. Geography wouldn't be my approach to things because it's not something that really inspires me. But then I think if it inspires you, it should be where you go. I'm more inspired of ideas of political control and constructs of power. So where you would be looking maybe at the geography of a place, I'd be looking at how the towns connected to the villages. Whether there was a patrol of knights that had to visit down there, and hence there'd be a road. I'd be looking at the structure of power, but that's my position, and I'm not recommending that for anyone else.
For me, I mean, not just as a GM, and generally as more than a writer, the geography is usually one of the first places I start when I'm actually world building, but it's not necessarily, if I have a small setting, I would quote something like the Lost Mines of Phandelver, for example. Someone said that in a tiny small area, like we talked about with Shadowdale earlier, you start off small, and then you can add bits and pieces to that. Globally, when you look at a world-building setting or something like that, geography is usually the first place you start. It's a rock, you add water, blah, 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 tidal events, etc., etc. You colour in the extra bits and pieces. I mean, that's literally is what world-building is. But on a smaller scale, just a region, you fill in the blanks, you go out. I mean, I think anyone that's ever been a GM here has always had those big bits on the map where, there's some generic culture here or something here or generic area here, mountains here, that somehow block the path. I mean, that's been going on for about 30, 40 years, I think, really. There's always been that whole thing where we have impassable mountains or whatever. I mean, I can remember being like 5 or 6 years old, creating random treasure maps as a kid with all these hazards and things like that. And still doing it 30 years later.
So I think geography is important, but it's not my forte or my skill sets. The way that we approached it, me being history buff, was to start in 10,000 BC and map all of the cool cultures across the world that we wanted to include in some form or another between 10,000 BC and 1000 AD, and did a coming back to the point about spreadsheet, a very big spreadsheet on that front. And then obviously then put across the fantasy influences that we wanted into it and the original ideas we had to come up with the world. But at that point, coming back to your original question, we then hired a professional cartographer who makes maps of the real world for a living, but is also a gamer, so it's his manna from heaven to actually, get paid to make really cool maps. You're welcome. Come and look at them later if you want. But that made a massive difference for us doing it, because suddenly you go, where's that bit of the world again? It's like, no, that's it. It's built. The coast is now there. You can't move it anymore, and it becomes canon. So for me, really, really important. But because I'm not a geography expert, I needed somebody to come in and challenge it and say, no, there's a central mountain spine there. Kev, you're saying that those are 3 times the height of Mount Everest. That's cool, but that means you've got rain on one side and it's dry on the other, so shift the desert, pal. That kind of thing. Really
there's definitely a benefit to having someone with a cartographical mind when it comes to making your world, because Rokugan, the Legend of the Five Rings, this is an infamous story from, I guess, about the 3rd edition of the game. That was a world that was designed by committee, in a way, because it was designed by people who won card game tournaments. And so you could have influence over what was going on in this part of the world, what clan invaded which part, and so on. And because it was designed by committee, parts of the world were designed over here, parts of the world were designed over there, and ended up with a river that famously ended up running uphill. And just geography that made no sense. It didn't even make sense in the setting. It was just hand-waved, which the 5th edition has thankfully done a lot to fix. But you do need someone who has both the historical perspective, because why would people live here? Is it because there's fresh water? Is it because there's some raw material there that is inaccessible anywhere else? And how hard is it to live there? Because that will tell you something about the people that live there and continue to live there. If it's constantly attacked, if there's monsters, if there's natural environmental hazards, that kind of thing.
Useful tip for people that are out there. You may have it already, but I actually bought a book, How to Draw Fantasy Maps. It's about £17 off Amazon, and it's brilliant. Not because your maps might look slightly better than a scribble, but it does teach you stuff that you go, the stream has to run down the mountain. So if you build a mountain, the river can't run back on itself. Otherwise, you wouldn't believe the number of maps out there that have got 7 bores where they go up and down, and it becomes a bit unrealistic. So if you're going for realism, then that's a great book to try.
It's something Klara and I were actually talking about, I think, just yesterday with the Elder Scrolls games. So I have a big problem with the geography in games like Elder Scrolls and the early Final Fantasies. I know they're video games, maybe it shouldn't matter, but I hate the idea of a city surrounded by castle ruins for miles with no one inhabiting a single one of them except monsters. Because what do these people in the city do? Are they literally just going from that door to that door all day? I know it's AI, I know, but I need to be able to suspend my disbelief. And you were saying Skyrim is a lot better at that. But yeah, when I look at a world, it needs to make some degree of sense. And geography does play a big part of that, because if the entire world is barren except for your city in the middle, I think that's A State, which is an old RPG. That's fine if it is A State, but if it isn't, it's nonsense.
Excellent, good question. Funny you should mention geography. Actually, I had a D&D campaign, and I had a sea coast at the top, and my party were coming along, and there was a river running south. And one was like, "Oh, there must be a mountain between here and there," and I was like, "What's there?" Exactly that situation. Next question.
Hi, I've got a question about cultures. Whether you're writing a source book for, say, a game based in the real world like Vampire, or you're kind of creating your own culture for a fantasy game, you'll potentially take hints and things from cultures that exist in the real world. How do you guys find trying to explain certain cultures in the real world that maybe you don't have first-hand experience of? Because I imagine there might be a bit of a fine line between what sounds good and what could potentially offend someone.
Yeah, you do it with a lot more sensitivity now than you used to, I think, is one answer.
Yeah.
Ask. That's generally the best way, you ask. When we did the Star Trek first book, we had an idea that we would have a Hindi lady on the front wearing the classic Star Trek miniskirt, and I forget what it's called, the marking. As soon as I heard that, I thought this could be a disaster because we don't know what the sensitivity is. So I got on the phone to my mate Shudat, and I asked him to ask his mum. And he did. And she responded with, "Why are you waking me up in the middle of the night?" Because he phoned her directly rather than waiting for morning. But she was fine with it. She asked some of her friends, they were fine with it. Generally nobody cared because we'd asked. Because we'd taken that simple thing of saying, "Hey, is this going to annoy you?" and veered away from it, it helped a lot.
Yeah, it's a very good question because I'm a firm believer of you can't really know what a culture entails before you've actually lived in it and been a part of it. But we can't do that because we write about all kinds of places around the world. I've done that. Written about Africa. I've never been there. So I have to tread carefully. First of all, I have to study the culture as much as I possibly can. That won't give me the same as if I live in Africa for 2 months or a year or even a week. But it's the only chance I have as a writer with low funds to actually experience the world or study what I can. So basically study all you can and maybe see if you can find someone who's actually from the part you're writing from. So sometimes I go on Reddit and I go on the subreddit for that city or that area and say, "Hey, I'm writing something. I can't tell you what it is, but I really need to know how is it for you? Can I interview you? Can I get some, inputs from you?" So I was writing about Detroit for one of my books for Colt, and I don't know anything about Detroit. I'm from Denmark. I couldn't know less. So coincidentally, I was staying in Edinburgh at that time, and I was living beside someone from Detroit. So I asked them, can I ask you some questions about Detroit? And it was a mom and her daughter. So I got the perspective from a mom who hated living in Detroit because she thought it was dangerous for her daughter, and a daughter who loved it because she was diving into all the subcultures. So it was great for me as a writer. I really got a sense of, okay, what is the youth culture in this city? What is the culture for people who are older? It was great. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you are writing about a pre-existing culture, just do your homework and seek out people who live there.
I would echo that research and asking as well. A cogent example from our world that we decided in Mornadar to make the gnomes the kick-ass race because they're gnomes and I like gnomes. So we called them the Nimshka, and they are basically a massive influence from the Alexander the Great army. So they've got big sarissas and they ride on massive fantasy warriors, war badgers, etc., etc. Because it's cool, gnomes on badgers. But obviously, having studied Greek and Greek history helped, but I made sure that I asked lots of people I knew who were Greek and said, "Look, is this actually, we're taking away real world history and basically putting you guys on badgers and making you kick ass? Is that okay?" And they looked at it and they were like, "That's amazing because you're still spreading the word of, the cradle civilization, etc., etc." But yeah, I wanted to ask first, so agreed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Claire?
Exactly how much research do you usually do before you start writing, and is there any particular method that you use?
So, well, really, it depends on how long a deadline we're given. I mean, if we could research for months, we would. That's not always a possibility. So I've worked on several historical RPGs. I know you have as well. And my first ever assignment actually was in a book called Sothis Ascends. This was my first ever paid writing gig. It was for a role-playing game called Mummy, and I had to write about the rise of Islam and or the era spanning the rise of Islam, so middle of the 6th century. And I knew very little about that when I first started. So I worked in the library. I did it the old-fashioned way, and for the first month of my assignment, I was making notes like I was studying for an exam or studying to write coursework or whatever. And it was fun because I was learning, and because generally learning about history is interesting if you expose yourself to a array of mediums. So I was watching documentaries, I was reading books, I was trying to speak to people who knew a little about it or lived it. Well, not lived the rise of Islam. That would be. I don't know any actual vampires. Yeah. But yeah, the fact that I spent that month doing research and really taking fastidious notes, and then making those notes into something legible, cut down the time required to write afterwards, because that kind of era has so many myths as well as facts related to it. You can just pull those out, you can expand on them, you can subvert them slightly. So in a way, as long as you don't go too far, the more research you do, the easier the writing becomes, which should be the objective.
Yeah, and I'll say that when I have a writing gig, when I write a game, I do exactly the same thing. I was actually thinking library in my head, because you are putting yourself in an environment, and I'm one of those persons, like, my mind goes everywhere, and when I'm writing I can't keep focus, so I have to force myself into an environment where I can actually focus. So going into a library, you have an unlimited amount almost of knowledge you can just grab from the shelves while you're sitting there. You don't have to carry books home. Practically, it's perfect. But I will also say, being a full-time nurse on the side, I don't always have the time to do that with my own games. I just don't have all the time in the world, and I think it's something that we need to be realistic, because most people don't do this professionally. So when I run a game for friends, I would sometimes just watch a documentary about the place. It generally can give you a good base knowledge of something, and even some like good pointers of plot hooks you can use in your own game. So yeah.
If it's your own game, cheat. Utterly cheat. If you get it wrong, one of your players tells you got it wrong, say to them, I know, but cut me some slack. And they usually should. If, however, you're doing it for a big project and you want to get it absolutely accurate, cheat. Go and speak to an academic at a university who does that for their living. They don't talk to human beings usually. So when someone shows an interest, they're like, oh yes, let me tell you everything. And they'll give you the right books to read. And rather than read 10 books to get 3 books of information, you read 3 books.
I mean, for Act on Cthulhu, I'm personally have been doing quite a bit of research for the Forest of Fear campaign, which is really set in about 6 weeks of 1944, where at the Battle of the Bulge. And I'm reading all the stuff about the troop movements and everything in the 2 weeks leading up to that. And the process of which I've learned, and this might turn a few people's stomachs, things like during the really cold states where they couldn't find any food, the troops were shooting deer for venison, pheasants for birds, but they stopped shooting the pigs, the wild boar in the forests. No one understood why until they found out that the troops were seeing the wild boar actually rooting in the bodies of the dead and eating their entrails, which turned them all pretty much against pork overnight as a result. I've also been researching stuff like trench foot and things like that, because this is what you do when you're writing these things. This is, I'm writing for Act of Cthulhu, which, as some of you might know, is fairly meticulous in its research, and I want to try and keep that going. But it's just 6 weeks, and I've got 5 or 6 different reference books, different things that we've all talked about, that as particular books we want to read. I've even bought a rough guide to the Ardennes, because surprisingly that tells you a little bit about the history of the area, but it tells you more about what folk eat. For example, French fries. It's a Belgian invention, not a French invention. And that's just one of the things I've picked up, and local delicacies and things like that. But research is important to a certain extent where it gives you a little bit of local flavour as well. If it's a fantasy game or something like that, of course you can fudge it slightly. Yeah, the sword's slightly balanced and made of a different metal or whatever. I mean, you're not really dealing with real world science or whatever. Fireballs explode, yeah. You're using magic for whatever purpose you're using magic. It can gloss over those, shall we say, or any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinct from magic or whatever. So you can get away with it. You can either MacGuffin the technology or just something similar, I think. But research is important if you're dealing with anything that's got basis in history, I think, definitely.
And if a co-worker happens to do a whole bunch of research for you, cheat.
Excellent. Any more questions?
Yeah, to take off direction a bit there. I find the best games are ones where the rules really play the game, that they respect what the authors are trying to do in the game. How important is it for you guys that when you are writing for games that you actually appreciate the rules? And as a kind of a bonus point question, are there any games you wouldn't write for because you love the world but hate the rules?
I'm going to, as a self-publisher, I'm going to pass on this one. I'll tell you what, I hate my world and the rules. There we go.
All right, so yeah, the rules should ideally play in. They shouldn't be layered on top. They should be webbed in, ideally. It's something one of my frequent colleagues, Rose Bailey, is a very big proponent of. She publishes a lot of indie games now, and she always makes the rules an integral part of the setting to a seamless degree. Now, it's something we try to do with V5. With Hunger. Hunger replaced blood points. Blood points were a staple of Vampire the Masquerade. You had a pool of blood, it went down, you fed, it went up. But that never created a sense of drama. It's interesting because when Vampire first came out, it was an interesting mechanic. But by the time Vampire had been out for 25 years, the idea of keeping your blood up high had lost any kind of tragedy, any kind of drama. It was just a resource management game. Having hunger as a constant threat, instead of that, your vampire is constantly hungry. As your hunger goes up, you roll more hunger dice, which means you may lose control and need to feed more. Suddenly embeds the theme of hunger, being you're a vampire, and the mechanic of hunger in playing a vampire. So that's a good example, I think, of how a mechanic can form part of the game after 5 revisions. But as far as games go, I'm not interested in ever working on anything OSR. And I've got a lot of love for playing Tunnels and Trolls as I was starting role-playing and sometimes going back to old-school D&D. But the mechanics for games like Tunnels and Trolls, games like Rifts, games like Morrow Project, really, Phoenix Dawn, they are so all-encompassing, to my mind anyway, that I just couldn't get on with that. I need to start with the characters first, and then kind of the rules need to meet them. I don't want to start with the rules and build the character from that.
Yeah, I see rules as guidelines more than rules. So maybe that's why I'm never hired to write rules. But I think it's a question of culture as well, because in Scandinavia we are very laissez-faire when it comes to rules. We like the concept Nordic roleplay, and Nordic roleplay is more of a, we focus entirely on the roleplay, and the rules are they're kind of there in the background. We can use them sometimes, and sometimes we choose not to use them. And it depends on, the type of game you're trying to create, the type of storyteller or GM you are. I don't personally use them that much. I tend to focus entirely on the roleplay, and then, as I said, as I mentioned, just take the rules that you find important to your game. Take the rules and use them in a way that creates a good role-playing experience for everyone. So you don't have to sit and look through every single page of your book and disturb your roleplay and your immersion because, how was it you did that, and what is the what kind of dice you use here? It doesn't really matter, because when I roleplay with my friends, it's about roleplay. It's not about rules. It's about roleplay. So I'm a little different in that perspective, because I know some people love rules, and I know they love to keep up on every single rule, and it gives them a good experience. But for me personally, roleplay is on the forefront, and rules are just there to use if you want them.
Hi, I'm the other guy. I like games to have structured rules. I find that when you set out a structured set of rules, not only are you just putting things in text for the sake of it, but you're saying, this is what this game wants to do. It's what it's about. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go and reinvent the wheel every single time you come to a new game. You can take a basic, solid engine block of a rule system and apply it in different ways. if I was taking Conan, and I was bringing that through 2D20, it would have tons of stuff about how I stab you, because that's what Conan's about. It talks about ancient worlds and different histories and all of this, but realistically, it's about how I stab you and then how I laugh afterwards. It's a game of psychopaths. But if I was to take that same game system and apply it to a romantic RPG like Blue Rose, I probably wouldn't have the same secondary systems. Like, I wouldn't need a weapon list that's an arm long.
Romeo and Juliet, just saying.
Well, yeah, Romeo and Juliet, you got a long sword and a rapier, maybe a dagger. But the rule system itself, how many dice I roll, how I roll dice, what these dice need to do, the basic stuff. I like that to be codified, so you teach people once and they remember it for all the games.
Okay. I think we've got time for one more question. I've already had one. Go on then.
Patreon and things like Kickstarter, do you find that you're getting to write more content rather than relying on a publisher like that?
I use Patreon, and I do all right by it. By no means could it act as a income. It's it's supplements. But yeah, it gives me a little more freedom to pick and choose rather than constantly having to hustle. Because when in this industry, if you're a freelancer, you are almost constantly expected to network because you're always looking for the next job. If you're doing it full time, you live and die by how many assignments you've got, quite frankly. So Patreon is a great assist in that. I think it's funny because Kickstarter went through this as well. When they first started out, people had this impression of them like they were a bit dirty. They were a way of milking money out of fans without them actually purchasing something straight away. But giving people the ability to spend money on supporting a creator they like, or pre-ordering a game if that's what Kickstarter's being used for, or publishing a deluxe version of a game, if that's what people want to spend their money on, then I think they're fantastic tools. Invisible Sun is probably the pinnacle of controversy in terms of how much money are people prepared to spend via Kickstarter on a game. Because Invisible Sun was several $100s for the core game, because you get a hell of a lot of props with it and things like that. And most people were saying a game shouldn't cost that much. Well, the good answer is, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy a Lamborghini. You can buy a Ford Fiesta. And that doesn't mean the Ford Fiesta is bad. It just means some people want the Lamborghini. And it doesn't mean the Lamborghini's better. It may not be better suited to you. It's just some people want one experience, some people want another.
Yes, unsurprisingly, I'm not. I'm a big advocate of Kickstarter. I know we've got a number of backers I can see in the room here, but when we launched our game, we thought we'd get 400 backers, make maybe £8,000, print a game, and that was us done with Midlife Crisis. So when we've now made 8,500 copies of the game. There's no way we would do that without Kickstarter. So I would highly recommend it if it's something that persuades you to do. Probably going a bit off topic, but I would say, just be aware of the difference between being a publisher and normally it's designer, but in this case writer. They are very different skill sets. I'm not unique, but most people don't like running a company and making a game. And once they've done it once, they usually go, I just want to make games, because running the company is very different. But yeah, it can be successful. And if you want to ask anything offline, just ask.
I think things like Kickstarter and Patreon are great for gaming in general. We do a lot of Kickstarter stuff. We put out a lot of products that way. But a lot of the time when I see someone who's an independent and they've produced something, and maybe it's only the first book, maybe it's not even that, maybe it's a page they've done that I think that's really inspiring, I like to go buy them a beer. I like that option. I'm lucky I'm not a freelancer. Because I was an evil banker back in the day, I'm actually useful in the commercial sense for Modiphius. So I'm on board to do financial work as well. So sometimes you can get your dream, which is writing books, but do other stuff too and find an alternate path that's not the freelance road.
Alrighty. I think that's all the time we got time for. So if you can give all our panelists a big round of applause for today. Thank you very much. Any last words you guys want to throw in before I let them go?
Yeah,
Buy
I'll
our
throw
stuff.
something in. I've always got. Yeah, we can. Let's self-promote. So it actually ties into the mechanics question. They Came From Beneath the Sea as a game I conceived of, developed. It's on backer kit right now because the Kickstarter concluded, very successful. And for some reason it only came to mind after we'd finished answering the question. It's a 1950s B-movie sci-fi game that straddles horror and farce. And one of the mechanics in it is cinematics. You have cinematics and you have quips. The cinematics are one of the most interesting mechanics I've devised of, if I could say so myself, where you insert movie-style effects, B-movie-style effects. So you can insert a cheap set. So you can play a cheap set down. So if the terror is too great, you just run straight through the wall. Or you can insert a missing reel, so that if you are about to be devoured by Centipus, the 100-tentacled octopus, and there is no way your characters are going to survive that, you insert a missing reel. The game stops. It then starts again with your characters somewhere completely different. You can never refer to what happened in the missing reel except in vague illusions because it's gone. Deleted scenes allow you to go back in time and roleplay flashbacks and things like that. And so that mechanical conceit for They Came From Beneath the Sea was, and what we'll be using in future They Came From games for different movie genres, enables you to use things that are perfect for the genre. They're mechanically fun, which is different because you don't always get fun mechanics in a game. And because we're putting them on cards, they're an interactive prop. And that was something we only really thought of late in the development process. Initially, cinematics were written down on everyone's character sheets, but as soon as we started putting them on post-it notes, and they'll be on cards when the game is released, people want to play them because they want to put something down that everyone else can look at. So yeah, mechanics can be great to build a world, to run a game, but they do need to be a fun part of it.
I can't beat that. I haven't developed my own game. I just write for other people's games. So I can tell you what I've been writing on recently, and it's a supplement for something called Contagion Chronicle. And it's a part of Chronicles of Darkness. So if you like werewolf, if you like mummy, if you like geist, if you like vampire, and you thought, you've been thinking to yourself one day, how can I create a group where it's not just vampires or not just werewolves? What if they work together? That is what I've been working on, a supplement to that game called Contagion Chronicle. And you are basically working together to fight against this contagion, this illness that's slowly taken over the entire world. And you have to work together as a group. How does a mummy and a vampire and a hunter or demon work together? Well, that's something you have to figure out. So I'm working on something called Contagious Cities. So it's a supplement to this game. And Contagious Cities is just a supplement where you can think yourself into this contagious idea in Australia, or in Italy, or in Sweden on a little island. So the contagion takes form in many different ways.
And Contagion Chronicle is also available on backer kit.
God, it's hot.
All right, call it there. I think that's time. All right, folks, thanks very much for coming. Thanks, everyone. See you all later.